So this is our monthly or almost monthly sort of new partner introduction. This is a high level overview of some of the different products that we have. We started doing this because we would talk to partners and find out they didn't know we offered certain solutions that we do offer, or they didn't know a lot about Zyxel, and they needed help learning more about us. So you can then sell your customers on us. And let's be honest, Zyxel is not a household name. So we're going to start with a little bit of background on who Zyxel is, and then we'll move into the products and we'll hit some of the key points on most of our major product lines. So to begin with, Zyxel, and that is how you pronounce it, Zyxel, is part of the Zyxel group, formerly known as Unizix. So hold on, let me get this up here. So basically, we are Zyxel Networks. This is the small business side of the operation. So we make our firewalls, switches, wireless access points, etc. Some of our partner companies are Black Cat, which you don't need to worry about, Mitra Star, which is our manufacturing arm, Zyxel Communications. They're the ones who make the service provider products, stuff that's aimed out there at the ISPs, VDSL2 modems, TR069 Plume managed gateways, things like that. So that's a sister company to us. And there's also some other companies in there, such as Zyxel, which aren't part of this graphic. So today we're just focusing here on Zyxel Networks. So a little background on who we are. We've been making computer networking products now for over 30 years. We got started all the way back in 1989. And we've been at this ever since. We were one of the first manufacturers to come out with Wi-Fi products back when it was just 802.11, no A, B, or G added on to it. We operate in 150 different global markets. We have over 700 employees, and there's 100 million devices out there deployed out in the field over those years. So I am talking to you from our North American office. So we cover the US and Canada, and we are based out of Anaheim, California. So that's where we are. So when you call in, you're talking to somebody based out of our US office. So the US office handles sales, it handles marketing. It's our tech support. So when you call into tech support, you are dealing with a Zyxel employee there at our offices. Unless you call in early in the morning, in which case we do transfer you to our German office to open up tickets early in the morning. But otherwise, it's all being handled out of our Anaheim office. It's also where our US warehouse is located. So when it comes to R&D, we've got R&D centers in 3 different countries. Right now, we've got them in Germany, in Taiwan, which is where our corporate headquarters is and where the bulk of our R&D is done. And we also do have an R&D center located in mainland China as well. So over the years, obviously, we've won a number of awards. The slide's a little bit old, but I'm just showing you here just globally a number of different awards have been issued to us for our various different product lines. I won't go through all of them. And then we've got a number of different partners that we have partnered up with for various solutions: McAfee, Siren, Trend Micro, Bitdefender, Wirestorm, Lastline, etc. So that's sort of it as far as a high-level overview of who Zyxel is. Now we'll start talking about the product. So I'm going to start by talking about Zyxel Nebula. And the reason I'm starting here is because this is a product that basically touches all of our other business product lines. So what is Nebula? Nebula was the first cloud solution aimed at the SMB, or the first full stack cloud solution aimed at SMB. So we launched this all the way back in 2016. We'd seen what solutions such as Cisco Meraki were doing out there for the enterprise space and thought it would be perfect for the SMB space. So we jumped right in. Now these days, just about everybody's got some sort of cloud offering, but we've been doing this since 2016 and we've been working on it ever since. And because of that, we offer what I think is probably the most robust, most feature-rich cloud managed platform. And so what does that mean? So it means basically, instead of needing to go in and configure all of your devices individually, or needing to get cloud controllers and things like that set up, basically instead you just go to a website, nebula.zyxel.com, you log in, and you have the ability there to configure and basically all of your Zyxel network devices. And it's designed from the ground up with the idea that you've probably got lots of customers. Those customers, each one may have more than one network. So we give you a unified experience to be able to manage your customers and manage all of their devices through just that one website. So everything's unified, give you central control. There's no software that needs to be set up. There's no virtual machines that need to be running anywhere. There's no other hardware that's needed. The Nebula agent is built into our hardware, so there's no cloud keys or CNA devices that you need to purchase and plug in and keep on that local network. And there's no configuration that needs to be done locally on the devices. You simply plug them in. They will reach out to the cloud, see if you want to manage them in the cloud. And if you do, they'll put themselves in cloud mode and automatically start talking to the cloud for their configurations. So it's truly a zero touch plug and play experience. So we do a monthly Nebula introduction where I talk a lot more about Nebula, but we'll just hit here a couple slides really quick, hitting on some of the key things here when it comes to Nebula. So Nebula has been designed to get you up and running in minutes. In addition to being plug and play experience to getting your hardware online and talking to the cloud, we've got a number of wizards and tools there to help walk you through at least getting the basic configuration done to get your devices on the internet and working. You can start configuring basically your customers' networks before you even get the hardware in hand. You can go in there and start configuring some basic settings. Once you do have the hardware shipped to you, you can start configuring the devices without even taking them out of the box. Simply scan the QR code that's on the outside of the box on most Nebula compatible products, assign it to a customer and a site, and you'll be able to start configuring them right then and there. And by the time the hardware does get to the customer site, you simply plug it in. It will connect to the cloud and download its configuration that you've got set for it. So just hitting here again, nothing extra you need to do. Nebula hardware will talk to the cloud automatically, no configuration required, no additional hardware or software needing to be set up. Just go to nebula.zyxel.com. This is what our dashboard looks like. You've got a number of different widgets here that you can choose which widgets you want to see, telling you what's going on your network. You've got two drop-down menus up here at the top of the page. One is a list of your customers whose networks you're managing. So you simply go to that pull-down menu, select the customer you want to manage. We'll then populate the second window here with all the sites that customer may have. Choose the site you want to go to, and you'll automatically be taken over to that customer and site. And then all your configuration and monitoring is done over here on the left-hand side menu. So Lonnie has a question here. Does every Zyxel device work with Nebula? Give me just a second. Give me 2 more slides or so, and I think I've got the answer for that in a little bit more visual form for you. So basically, using Nebula is really simple. Configure your customer, start configuring their sites. Once you get some hardware for them, scan it in and assign it to them. And then once you can, plug in the hardware at the customer's site. It will automatically connect to the cloud, put itself in cloud mode, download its configuration, update its firmware. From then on, you're ready to go managing your customer. So Nebula itself is free. This is also something that I think sets us apart from most of our competition. Most of our competition either requires payment to use it or has some very serious limitations on the free version of their cloud management platform, usually limiting the number of devices to a very small number that can be managed. So ours is free. There's an unlimited number of customers you can manage, an unlimited number of devices you can manage, an unlimited number of sites that you can manage with the free version of Nebula. Now, we do offer some optional licenses which do unlock additional features, primarily aimed at those of you that are offering managed services, better troubleshooting tools, the ability to store years worth of logs in the cloud and keep an audit log of changes being made, tools to automatically draw out which devices are plugged into which other devices, additional admin accounts, things like that. But the core functionality of all your products is available in the free version of Nebula there for you. So just some questions here we often get when it comes to Nebula. So one is, does my whole network need to be Nebula? No. So Nebula hardware is just how we're managing. So Nebula is just managing. So your switch is still a switch. Your gateway is still a gateway. Your access point is still an access point. They will all work just fine with which other hardware you may have already at that customer site. It's just you won't be able to manage the non-Nebula hardware through the Nebula interface. Do I need a Zyxel gateway to do captive portal or guest access? And the answer to that is no. Captive portal and guest access is built into our access points. So we get this question a lot because we have customers who want to enable some sort of guest network at their customer location, but they've got a gateway that was provided to them by their ISP. And for whatever reason, you either can't or don't want to swap out that gateway, not a problem. You can still do that because the functionality is built into the APs themselves. We even have the ability to provide isolation if your customer's network doesn't support VLAN tagging, for instance. So we can do what's called layer 2 isolation to put the guest on a separate network. And instead of using VLANs, we use this layer 2 functionality to block any direct IP or direct access to MAC addresses that you don't want them to have access to. So it provides a VLAN-like way of isolating those users if you can't use VLAN. We get asked a lot about things like HIPAA, PCI, GDRP. So yeah, that all works fine with Nebula. The cloud is just there for log storage and for management coordination. None of your customers' data is going to our cloud. Anything that's supposed to stay on the local network stays on the local network. Anything that's supposed to go out to the internet goes directly out to the internet. It does not touch our servers. So using Nebula is not going to be a problem. And then we often get asked, who hosts your cloud? Are you guys doing this in-house? Do we have to trust you for cloud security and cloud hardware? And the answer is no. So we partnered with Amazon. So we use Amazon AWS, just like a lot of the biggest websites out there. And we've got nodes scattered around. So, for instance, in Europe and in certain countries, you may require that the Nebula cloud be hosted in that country or in that region. So we have the ability to do that in those parts of the world. And so because the hardware or the nodes in Nebula are sort of distributed, in theory, if one or more of those nodes go down, hopefully the traffic gets rerouted to other nodes and helps give us a little bit more lifetime. And another common question we get is, well, what happens if AWS does go down? What happens to my networks? And the answer is nothing happens to your networks. They continue to function just as they have indefinitely. It's not like certain other cloud platforms, which after a day or two, if they can't reach the cloud, they sort of give up. We don't do that. But obviously, you can't configure the devices if they can't reach the cloud. We can't store logs for you if they can't touch the cloud. But the hardware and the networks themselves will continue to function just fine. So almost done with Nebula, guys. So when we started Nebula, we did it the Cisco Meraki way. And for those of you that aren't familiar with it, with Cisco, if you want to manage your stuff in the cloud, you buy Meraki hardware. If you want to manage things the more traditional way, you buy Cisco hardware. And oftentimes the hardware is pretty much the same thing, just different software loads on it. So we started doing it that way in the early days, but we quickly found that that's not the best way to do it. So what we introduced here is something called Nebula Flex. Basically, any of our hardware that is labeled Nebula Flex can be used with our Nebula Cloud for management, or it can be used standalone, the traditional management ways that you would normally do things before cloud came along. So that gives you the flexibility based on your customer's needs, whether you want to use that hardware in the cloud or not. And it allows you to standardize on certain models again, and then be able to use those same models again, whether you're using cloud management or not. So Nebula Flex is the main basic way of doing things here. We do also have some products labeled Nebula Flex Pro. For the most part, the Pro just means it comes bundled with 1 year of our Nebula Pro Pack. So Pro Pack is an optional license that unlocks some additional MSP type features. So if you buy a product labeled Nebula Flex Pro, it comes bundled with 1 year license that you can use or not use. On the APs, the Nebula Flex Pro APs, the Pro also unlocks local management. So if you're wanting to use local management of your APs through a controller, but you don't want to use the cloud, you still need to buy Nebula Flex Pro because only the Pro models have the ability to talk to a local controller. And just real quick here, putting stuff into the Nebula cloud is really easy. You log into Nebula and you register the device and you assign it to your customer and to a site. The hardware within a few minutes, even if it's already online, will realize that you now want to manage it in the cloud. It will automatically put itself into cloud mode for you. If for some reason you want to take that unit out of the cloud and put it back in its traditional mode, real easy, log into Nebula, remove the device from the Nebula cloud, and it will automatically reboot in standalone mode. Now, a real key thing here for you is the configuration is not the same between cloud mode and non-cloud mode. So they're two independent configurations. So when you put it into cloud mode, it will download the configurations that you've got set up in the cloud. If you then put it back into standalone mode, it will factory reset with a blank configuration that you will need to configure locally. So it doesn't, try to port those settings back and forth between the two modes or two independent modes. And so just to hit here really quick, on the licensing, we've got that free version, which all devices are out of the box. We've got Nebula Plus Pack, which is sort of a lightweight, adds a couple extra features, primarily a few extra admin accounts, and gets you a week's worth of logs in the cloud, and gets you email push alerts if devices go offline. Then we've got the Pro Pack, which is what, if you are buying some licenses, Pro Pack is easily our most popular license option there for you. And then we've also got the Nebula MSP Pack. So this is a license that's not for the site, it's for individual admin users that unlock some additional MSP type licenses for that user and that user alone. But it works across all customers that you may be managing with that account. So now for the question we got earlier, which is what devices support Nebula? So this is the list of what we've got up here for you. As a general rule, all of our best-selling business solutions work with Nebula these days. There are still a few things trickling in that don't really support it. But just in general, everything here on the top half of the slide, this is Nebula Flex. Everything on the bottom part here is Nebula Flex Pro. So basically, when it comes to our business class access points, all of our current NWA and W series access points support Nebula. When it comes to our switches, the 1915 series, the 1920 V2s, the 1930s, the 2220s, 1350s, 3800s, those all support Nebula. When it comes to our security gateways, our new SCR, it supports Nebula. Our USG Flex series, it supports Nebula. The old VPN series, it supports Nebula. The ATP series, it supports Nebula. Now, there is one little exception here, or at least it's a limited support, is the USG Flex H series. So this is our new hardware platform. It has basically only pass-through mode. It's available for Nebula. So it does not currently have full Nebula support. It won't be till later this year that the H series gets full Nebula support, but the standard USG Flex series has full Nebula support. And then our 4G LTE outdoor router, it has Nebula support. Okay, so that's it for Nebula. Hopefully we answered some of your questions you may have on it. Again, we do have sort of a dedicated Nebula webinar that I do once a month, so you might want to join that if you have some more questions, or just type them in with that question and answer interface, and I will answer them later today. So let's talk about our wireless access points. So we've broken them up into three categories here for you. HQ is calling it simplicity, flexibility, and ultimate. So basically, the short version of this is the simplicity line is really aimed at SOHO. These are our SOHO access points. They may be missing some more business class features in them, and they've only got a 2-year warranty. Our flexible and ultimate series are our true business class APs, and these all have lifetime warranty on them, and basically the full feature set is there for you. So I don't want to spend too much time on the simplicity side of things here, but I did want to sort of highlight that for you. So basically, if you're looking at business class products, you really want to look at the NWA series. It's got 3 numerals in the name. So the NWA 110, 210, 220. That's how you can differentiate these from the simplicity series. You will see here, these all just have 2 numerals. So 90, 50, 55, etc. So basically anything under 100 is over here with a 2-year warranty. Anything that's 100 or higher is going to be here on the business side of things with the lifetime warranty. And then the key differences here between the flexibility series and the ultimate series is 2 things. The ultimate series in general has some of our unique antenna technology, and we will talk about that here on a future slide. It is also the ultimate series has Nebula Flex Pro. So if you want that bundled license, buy the ultimate series. If you're looking to use a local controller for your AP management, you want the ultimate series. And the ultimate series always starts with the letter W. So really easy when you're looking at the price list. If it starts with W, it is the ultimate series here. If it starts with NWA, you then want to look if it's below 100 or above 100. So below 100 SOHO, above 100 business class. So when it comes to how we build our access points, we do it a little bit differently. Depending on what trade show you've been to, we may have had some demo units out for you to pick up and hold. We may even had some opened up that you could look inside. One of the things you will notice is our access points weigh a lot more than our competition, even our more expensive competition. And that has to do with how we are building our hardware. So we've got basically two things here in mind when it comes to designing our hardware: longevity, performance. So when we're dealing with solid state technology like an access point, the two major causes of failure are going to be capacitor failure. Most electrolytic capacitors have a habit of failing over time, either drying up, boiling over, denting, whatever. And then you also have heat fatigue. So to solve the capacitor issue, we only use solid state capacitors on our access points, even our cheap little $100 ones, to help them last longer. And then to deal with heat fatigue, um, we've spent a lot of time and effort working on heat dissipation. So one thing you will notice is our access point housings, the top of them have a lot of vent holes in them, where some of our cheaper competition has no vent holes. That's to allow the heat to get out of those access points, so we can offer that lifetime warranty. And to help with that, we normally in most of our APs have a large metal heat plate that goes behind the main board. So this draws the heat out of the board components here and helps vent it out of those holes in the top of the case itself. The other area here comes to how we design our hardware. So most of our business class access points have additional shielding on the board than you will see in most of our competitors' products. So in addition to normal EMI shielding for the Wi-Fi, we also integrate 4G and 5G filters into our board. So why do we do that? We do that because 4G and 5G, depending on where you are in the local towers, may use frequencies that border Wi-Fi frequencies and may bleed over and cause interference, especially for those of you doing deployments in office buildings where cellular signal natively doesn't get inside the building. So they've used a DAS system of some sort to bring LTE or 5G into the building itself. So you often run into situations where you've got an access point just a few feet from the same place where you've got a DAS remote unit distributing broadcasting 4G and 5G in that same building. So our shielding there helps reduce the interference that may happen in those cases. The other thing we do that's very different than most of our competition, including, again, some of our more expensive competition, is we don't put the antennas directly on the PCBA. They are on their own board, and with most of our AP designs, there will be a metal shield that goes between the main board and the antenna board to create greater isolation between the antennas and the board itself. Now, this doesn't make much difference on when you've got a good, strong connection to the access point, but it can make a huge difference on those edge cases where you've got those users where the signal is just barely getting back to the access point. This better isolation can be the difference between a really frustrating, unusable Wi-Fi connection and a slow but reliable Wi-Fi connection. Going on now to talk about our antennas, as I mentioned earlier on the Ultimate Series slide, we have some antenna technologies that are a little bit different or unique to us or almost unique to us. So one of them is what we call dual optimized antennas. So if you look at our access points and you look at the model name, if the end or get close to ending in either D or DI, that tells you that access point has dual optimized antennas. So basically what happens with your traditional access point is the antennas have one set fixed pattern, and they've been optimized to the idea that you're going to mount them on the ceiling above the area that's going to be covered, and they radiate out a signal in what's roughly an antenna or an umbrella shape, radiating out and downwards from where that access point is. So unfortunately, out there in the real world, you don't always get to mount your access points on the ceiling above the area. Sometimes you end up having to mount them on a wall. So when you do that, the antenna pattern is less than optimal for wall placement. It ends up sending a lot of the signal up into the ceiling, a lot of the signal down into the floor. If you're on a multi-floor building, it may cause interference between the floors. So our solution to that is the dual optimized antenna. Basically, instead of having one fixed antenna pattern in the device, we've got two sets of antennas. One that's optimized for ceiling mount, one that's optimized for wall mount. And you can choose which of the two to use based on where you've installed that access point. The other technology we have is our smart antenna technology. If you're familiar with Ruckus's BeamFlex Plus, it's a similar technology to their BeamFlex Plus. And basically what happens here is instead of having one fixed antenna pattern or having two antenna patterns to choose from, we have an antenna array that's literally got hundreds of different antenna patterns that we can choose from. So our algorithm takes a look at where the client is in relationship to the access point and focuses the signal towards that client. In addition to that, this is what sets us apart from some of the other products out there that claim smart antenna. Unfortunately, smart antenna is just a generic term anybody can use. Is our algorithm also looks at other sources of interference coming on the same channel that that access point is using and has the ability to choose an antenna pattern that ignores those sources of interference. So because of that, you have less problems in an RF interference prone environment. It also really helps you out as far as putting additional clients, cramming more users onto that same access point, or if you have something where you've got a lot of access points in an area, it helps with that as well. So it's a huge difference in things like smart classrooms, um, conference rooms, expo centers, things like that. It can make a huge difference as far as the performance. So obviously, we've made a lot of claims. So excuse me, the networking group here at the University of Brescia in Italy. Now, this is a number of years ago, to be fair. They heard claims that brands like us and Ruckus were making about the benefits of smart antenna. So they decided to get together and test it. So you can go find that. If you just Google Zyxel smart antenna white paper, we have a white paper which sort of highlights the key results that this networking group found. And we also have a link to the full report. So you can see all the tests they did, all of the results, not just the ones we were highlighting for you. So that is out there for you if you want to see the full thing. But the short version of it is in interference prone environments, which are basically anywhere where you've got a lot of Wi-Fi devices. Like I said, conference centers, expo centers, even office buildings where you've got a lot of small offices and each office has their own network built up inside there where you can't control them all. Up to 70% better performance compared to APs that don't use smart antenna. When we compared us to Cisco, we got which has not smart antenna, but they've got their own sort of RF interference technology, up to 56% better performance, and even up to 45% better performance than Ruckus in some tests. So that's it for access points. Now we're moving on to switches. We've got a lot of them, a heck of a lot of switches. So rather than go through them all, I thought I would talk a little bit about our naming and how the naming can sort of clue you in as to what features may be there. So you can, without knowing for sure which switch you want, you can look at that price list and figure out, okay, is that a switch I'm looking for this customer or not? So short versions of it are, as the model number series goes up, the more features the switch has. So our 1000 series and 100 series and 1100 series switches, those are unmanaged. The first switches we have with a little bit of management to them through a web interface is the 1200 series. Then as you jump up to the 1900 series, web managed, some more features. 1915 series, a little bit more features, and Nebula support. So basically everything 1915 and up, with a few exceptions, is going to add Nebula management to you, for you here. And again, going from 1915 to 1920, a little bit more features. 1930 series, it's about the same, a little bit more features. Jumping up to the 2220 series, big jump up in features. The main difference being this is a true layer 2 plus switch. It has a command line interface as well as Nebula, as well as a web interface, where the 1900 series here are Nebula and web, but no command line interface. And then you'll notice here we've got the 1350 series, which is sort of on its own little chunk away from the rest of these. So it is a special series of switches that we have that were designed specifically for those of you doing IP cameras. There's some cool extra features in there, particularly designed for those of you doing IP surveillance, although some of those features may be useful in other environments. But they're sort of their own thing that doesn't neatly fit into this, progressive series of feature improvements as we go up in the model. But just in general, look at those first couple digits of the model. Is it a 1250 and you're comparing it to a 1920? Well, then the 1920's got more features because it's got the bigger number. So before the numbers, when you're looking at the switches, we will have some letters, and the letters will tell you what sort of ports that switch has. So if the switch starts with the letters ES, that's telling you that switch is a fast Ethernet switch. If it starts with GS, like GS 1200-5, it's telling you it's a gigabit switch. So all the ports on that switch are gigabit. If you see an MG switch, that's telling you that all the ports on that switch are multi-gig. Could be 2.5, could be 5 gig, somewhere in there it's multi-gig. And all of the ports are going to be multi-gig. If you see XS, that's telling you all of the ports are 10 gig. And then if you see XGS, the X is telling you some of those ports are 10 gig, and the GS is telling you some of those ports are 1 gig. So traditionally, a lot of our rack mount switches are XGS. So you've got 24 or 48 ports of 1 gig switches, and then you've got 2 or 4 or whatever 10 gig uplink ports on those switches. So if you need 10 gig uplink ports but only 1 gig, XGS is the way to go. And then if you see XMG, that's telling you that that switch, most of the ports are multi-gig, and there's going to be at least one, if not more, 10 gig uplinks. So if you need 10 gig uplinks and you need multi-gig for everything else, XMG is what you're looking for. So you can sort of combine these letters together with those model numbers from the previous slide, and get a rough idea of what that switch is offering there for you. And then we also have some suffixes. So if the switch name ends in HP, that is telling you that that switch supports either PoE plus or PoE plus plus. If you see it ending in EP, that usually means it supports PoE plus, but it's got a smaller power budget. So one of the complaints we had was, hey, I only need to PoE power a couple devices. I don't want to pay for 375 watts of PoE budget. Don't you have something cheaper? And that's where the EPs come in. So they'll have a much smaller power budget, maybe 100 watts, 150 watts instead, as far as the total power budget goes. If you see FP, those are switches that have an even bigger power budget than the regular ones. So for those of you that are powering, some really heavy duty access points or some heavy duty IP cameras, the FP switches may be what you're looking for. So again, that's the ending suffix. And then if it ends in F, that just tells you that it is a fiber switch. So all of the ports will be fiber. So again, just sort of combine those all together and you can sort of figure out what it is you're looking for there when you're looking at that price list and seeing, 100 and some models of switch listed. So some key features that are available on our switches here for you is most of them, again, everything pretty much 1915 and higher in the numbering, supports Nebula Flex or Nebula Flex Pro. We offer, everything from unmanaged to full managed. We've got several different offerings when it comes to PoE. As we mentioned, we support PoE plus, PoE plus plus, various different configurations as far as PoE budget goes. And we offer full, layer 2 plus and layer 3 plus switching solutions for you. So one of the cool things here about our switches is most of them, pretty much I think everything 1915 and higher, is running Zynos. So Zynos is our own operating system. So why is that a benefit for you? A lot of other switch vendors, right? You go out there and they simply take whatever the interface is that comes from the chipset vendor or the ODM. You may be buying from multiple chipset vendors. Some switches may be Broadcom, some of them may be Rawlink or something else like that. So they all will have different naming, or they may have, different behavior based on those settings. So because we use Zynos, which is our own operating system that sits on top of the hardware, we're not using the manufacturer or the chipset vendor's interface. So everything is consistently named and functions consistently between the different series of switches. Everything has the same SNMP and MIB support built into it. Those that have a command line interface have the same basic command line interface commands for those of you who like to script, etc. And much like our APs, our switches all come with a lifetime warranty. And that's just because of, again, how we build them, using those solid state capacitors, putting in better noise filters, putting in better surge protection to help make sure those switches last for you. So one of the cool features we offer on most of our switches is intelligent PoE management. So I want to explain how PoE usually works. So when you plug in a PoE device that's based on the standards into a switch that's based on the standards, The connected device basically identifies itself and says, I am a class whatever product. And then the switch allocates PoE power based on whatever device class it identified itself as. The problem we run into is that there's not enough classes. For instance, as you see here, if your device uses more than 15.4 watts of power and less than 30 watts of power, it is class 4. So while the first class here, or excuse me, the first range here, PoE, 15.4 watts, that was broken up into 4 classes, 0 to 3. So you had a lot of granularity. But with PoE Plus, we doubled the budget that's available, but we only added 1 additional class. So whether your device requires 16 watts of power or 29 watts of power, it is a class 4 device, and the switch will reserve 30 watts of power for it. PoE++ gives us 2 classes to divide up another 30 watts of power available. So again, not very granular. So our intelligent PoE management allows us, our switches, to essentially look at the PoE draw from connected PoE devices and then release the reserved power beyond what that device needs for other devices. So because of that, you can put more devices on the same switch before you exceed your PoE budget. So we'll give you an example here really quick. Here is an IP phone. The device itself is a class 3 device. So the switch will reserve 15.4 watts of power for every one of these phones you plug into that switch. However, this device only actually uses 9 watts of power. So using our intelligent mode, we will only reserve 9 watts of power for that device. So in order to plug in 24 of these phones, if you were using the industry standard way of doing PoE, it would require a PoE budget of 370 watts. However, with our intelligent PoE mode here, to plug in 24 of these phones, you only need 216 watt power budget on that switch. So yeah, unless you put more devices on the same switch, or maybe allow you to buy a cheaper switch to power the same number of devices that you would normally need a bigger switch for. And just something to highlight here, we do offer 2 different PoE injectors. Why am I bringing this up, right? You've got PoE switches. Why am I bringing up PoE injectors? And the reason for that is really simple. A lot of our new access points, Wi-Fi 7, some of the higher end Wi-Fi 6E products, may require more power than your existing PoE switches can provide. A lot of these new devices require PoE++ or 802.3 BT, where your switches that you have currently may only be 802.3 AF or 802.3 AT and can't provide the full power. In addition to that, a lot of these access points, because they're so fast, perform best when plugged into a multi-gig port. So rather than having to throw out your 24 or 48 port switch to plug in a couple new access points, you can instead just buy one of our 2 PoE injectors here. This one, the PoE 12.30W, it's got a 2.5 gig multi-gig ports on it, and it can provide 30 watts of power. Our PoE 12-60W has 5 gig Ethernet ports on it and can provide up to 60 watts of power for a connected device. So what we're seeing is a lot of people who are buying some of these high-end APs just using these PoE injectors to power them rather than upgrading their entire switch infrastructure. So when it comes to multi-gig here, we've got a lot of different options for you. Here on the low-end side of things, we have the MG105, MG108, XGS 1010-12, XGS 1210-12, XGS 1250-12. So basically over here, unmanaged, limited web management here. And then on the business end of things here, we've got the XMG 1930 series switches, which will have 10 gig uplink ports and maybe multi-gig or all 10 gig, depending on the model here. Jumping up to the XGS 2220s and the XS 3800s for the layer 3 or command line management options there for you. So a number of different options there. So that's it for switches. Now let's get to security. We're almost done, guys. You've survived this long. So now we're talking about security products. So just one thing to highlight here for you, we have been ICSA Labs certified now for 23 years straight. So ICSA Labs is an independent testing group that tests firewall and VPN products. So we've been certified by them independently now for 23 years. So it's something maybe to bring up if your customers are saying, hey, I know who WatchGuard is, I know who Fortinet is, what is this Zyxel? And you can just point out to them, look, independent labs have passed this product, it is secure, don't worry about it. So when it comes to our series of products, we used to have a VPN series. Those have been phased out. We now have a USG Flex series, an ATP series, and an SCR series. And then we've got a USG Flex H series, which probably should be its own separate thing, but it's not on this slide. So one key thing here to talk about, the ATP series is being phased out. There are a couple models we're keeping around because there is not an equivalent on the USG Flex side, but for the most part, the ATPs are going away. So why is that? So the ATP series was basically our USG Flex series UTM firewalls, but instead of using traditional UTM firewall services, they used advanced threat protection, hence the ATP, which used sandboxing and machine learning to identify threats, identify zero-day threats, and use the cloud to inform devices that a new threat had been found and how to identify it. We now have the ability to basically turn a USG Flex into an ATP via a software license. So rather than keep, the same hardware around with two different feature sets, we're transitioning everything to the USG Flex. And then if you want traditional UTM, you've got it. If you'd rather have ATP, you buy the license for ATP. It enables the ATP on the USG Flex hardware. So again, it's just streamlining the products being offered to make it simpler for you. Again, we have the new USG Flex H series, which is based on a new software platform. It's a lot higher performance, but some of the features such as full nebula management are still missing from that new software stack, but it will be coming later this year. So something to keep in mind. And then we've got our new SCR series, which launched in the second half of last year. It's designed to compete with like the Ubiquiti and Netgear firewall UTM routers. So it's a lightweight, license-free UTM security router. So one thing we do a little bit differently than most of our competition is we're really good at hardware, really good at the software that runs on the hardware. We are not security specialists. And a lot of your other firewall vendors try to also be a security provider. They try to go out there and identify new antivirus threats, UTM things, all these other stuff that goes into a UTM firewall on their own. So we don't do that. We don't do that in-house. We realize that's not our strong point. So what we do differently is we've partnered with other vendors who are experts in these spaces to provide the signatures that we use on our UTM firewall products. So depending on the UTM offering and the model, we work with McAfee, WebRoot, Lastline, Trend Micro, and Bitdefender to provide those signatures that we use on our security gateways. So just talking roughly here about the USG Flex series of products, some of the features that we offer on these firewalls include web and content filtering, including SSL encrypted web pages, application control, the ability to create policy rules in the interface based on the individual application. So we've got a list of applications we can recognize and features in those applications we can manage through policy rules. So you can set that up based on applications instead of needing to know, destination and protocol and all that. We've got it already there for you. Anti-spam functionality, anti-malware, intrusion detection and prevention. We can work with some of our access points from the security gateway to provide collaborative detection and response between the gateway and the access points. Sandboxing, reputation filters, reporting, unified centralized reporting for all of your customers, lightweight VPN clients, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all features that are there for you. We also have some extra features. So in addition to being a UTM firewall gateway, we have some other features we can offer here. Secure Wi-Fi, the ability to turn access points into essentially centrally managed VPN appliances. We've talked about Nebula already, Nebula management. We have the ability to turn your UTM gateway also into a hotspot management for doing like a small hotel or something like that. We have the ability to have your USG Flex operate also as a AP controller to manage local APs. We support device high availability. So you can have two of these plugged in, one fails, the other one automatically takes over. We can use a license to convert your device into an SD-WAN box. And then we also offer our connect and protect functionality there too, sort of a lightweight UTM features for managed access points. So just really quick here, I wanted to show a slide here on the secure Wi-Fi because it is kind of a cool feature. It works with basically all of our access points that start with 500 or higher. And basically it turns this access point into a managed VPN box. So instead of having to configure software on your end user's PC or laptop that they take home with them, or instead of giving them a VPN appliance that they have to plug in behind their existing router they got from their, Comcast or whoever, and end up in a double natted situation, you give them an access point. They plug it in wherever they are. It will see that it's supposed to be managed as part of this VPN solution called Secure Wi-Fi, and it will automatically start broadcasting an SSID that acts as a VPN tunnel. So your end user simply connects to that SSID, can be the same one they use in the office, and it essentially routes their traffic over a VPN back to one of our USG Flex gateways at the central office. Now, the nice thing with this um, is it does require 802.1x authentication. So not just any device can connect to that SSID. They have to have a username and password. And if you want, you can enable two-factor authentication on top of that. But it's nice because it is an access point. It isn't a router. So you don't have to worry about double NAT and anything like that. You simply plug it into their existing home router and it just works. And then also just to highlight here, we have what's called a Zyxel account. So you use that account to be able to handle online license management, to get a database of all of your existing customers and their hardware that you've got out there. And it also provides the link to our reporting software. And then lastly here, just want to touch briefly here, the new SCR50AXE, because this is a new product. Again, it's a lightweight, sort of like a consumer hardware security router designed to compete with those low-end security routers you see from Ubiquiti and Netgear and others. So it's got a built-in Wi-Fi 6E access point built in onto it. It's got 4 Ethernet ports for local stuff there. It has built-in auto VPN functionality. It can be managed with Nebula. And it has a subscription-free UTM Lite security features on there using IP reputation filter to be able to block, phishing attempts and other sorts of attacks coming from the internet. And then, as I mentioned before, we have this new USG Flex H series. So the idea behind the H series is to take our existing USG Flex and upgrade them for performance. This is new hardware that runs faster. It's also a new software stack that's separate from our old one. So this is our next generation operating system. And like I mentioned before, there are still some features that are missing on these that are on the old ones, but all those features will be coming at some point later this year via free software upgrade. So basically it gives you a USG Flex on steroids. Then lastly here, just wanted to highlight for you, we do have a YouTube channel. Most of our webinars are recorded and uploaded to this YouTube channel. So if there's ever a webinar you want to attend but couldn't make it, or something you saw in a webinar you want to share with one of your coworkers, within a day or two of the actual webinar, it will show up on our YouTube page. Our YouTube page also has video case studies, some best practices documents, and other sorts of things mixed in there. And then always, you can connect to us on LinkedIn. So the US channel here is in there as Zyxel US channel. That's who you want to connect with. Zyxel Networks is there. There's also a Zyxel, parent company in Taiwan. So Zyxel US channel is who you want to connect to on LinkedIn. And with that, guys, that's the end of today's webinar. If there are any questions, again, send them in using question and answer interface. So far, none have come in other than that one earlier that I already addressed. While we wait to see if anyone's typing any questions in, I do also want to point out that we do have user forums now. So forum.zyxel.com. It's a place for you to reach out and talk to your fellow Zyxel users and installers. These forums are monitored by our team in HQ, so you will sometimes see somebody from R&D or tech support answering questions in there. It's also usually the first place where release notes, security warnings, and things like that are posted. So it's a good idea just to keep an eye on it just for that, if nothing else. Okay, so Papazian, Richard, I hope I pronounced that right. I'm having trouble understanding Nebula versus One versus Circle versus distribution. So let's go ahead and try to sort of talk about each of those and what the differences are, because I today have really only talked about Nebula. Let's go through them. So to start with Nebula, Nebula is a cloud management platform. So that's a way to be able to centrally manage all of your devices through the cloud. Zyxel One Network want to make sure I'm not getting confused. There was a couple things that we had that were sort of using that naming. Um, One was on the consumer side of things. So we aren't going to talk about that. The other one has to do with our tools. So we've got some tools, some discovery tools that you can use, that you can download for free. And basically, it just scans your network and identifies all the Zyxel devices, and then provide links for you to be able to locate those devices and access their admin interface. I believe that's what the one is. Like I said, we've used it a couple times on some different solutions. So it may be you're talking about a different one, but I think that's the one you're probably referring to. So basically, if you're doing local management, you aren't using the cloud, you can launch our Zyxel One software, and it will basically scan the network and find the Zyxel devices, give you their IP address, and a link to be able to log into their web GUI. So you would only use that if you're not using Nebula. Circle. So Circle is a tool for for you as a reseller, assuming you're here because you're one of our partners. It's sort of like an online store for buying your licenses. So instead of going to a distributor and ordering the licenses and waiting a day or two for them to be sent, you can simply go into the Nebula interface or the USG interface, select the devices that you want to buy licenses for. We will suggest the licenses you want. You click, I want to buy those. It will take you over to Circle to buy those licenses. And then for most of those licenses, once you've bought them, it will automatically assign them back to that site. So it's just a way of buying licenses online. So we have two versions of that. We have Marketplace, which is for end users, and we have Circle, which is for our partners. So in order to get Circle access, you do need to reach out to your salesperson and have them set you up with a Circle account. But it will allow you to buy licenses cheaper than you would at Marketplace, so you can still get some markup and margin for yourself. Generally, distribution is going to have the best prices. But again, distribution doesn't have these in stock, and it can take a day or two for those licenses to show up. Circle is going to be a little bit more expensive than distribution, but it happens basically instantaneously. And for most licenses, it will automatically apply them to the devices. So you don't have to sit there and type in the license keys or scan in those license keys. So that's going to be the differences between Circle and distribution for you when it comes to online licenses. So I hope those answers your questions. I'll stick around here for a second in case you need any clarification on that. I know I don't always do the best job explaining these. Will USG Flex will the Flex 200 HP have Nebula and web management at some point? So yeah, so the HP is part of that H series. So it's part of the USG Flex H series. As I understand things now, and keep in mind, I am not the security guy. The only management through Nebula we have now is the pass-through management, where basically you log into Nebula and it allows you to basically see the device's local GUI through the Nebula interface. So full Nebula management is coming later this year. So essentially the USG Flex H series will have all of the same Nebula features as the current USG Flex devices do later this year. It's just not there today. Okay, so Papacian here is asking again, how can Nebula be kept safe from hacking? It could be potentially devastating if a hacker obtained configuration access to switches and firewalls. Okay, so let's try to adjust that. So with Nebula, if you are using Nebula, all the management is done through our Nebula cloud. So the devices talk to our Nebula cloud. That's where they get their configuration from. Now, the way they communicate with the cloud is obviously an area where there may be some chances at attacks. So unlike a lot of our competition that creates their own protocols in-house that, who knows how secure they are, we use CapWAP, which is an industry standard. I believe it's an open standard. So we use CapWAP to secure those communications between our devices and the cloud, rather than something that's homebrew. So that should be a very safe way of doing the communication. It includes full encryption of all the data back and forth, handles the handshaking. All of our Nebula compatible devices have a certificate loaded in, a unique certificate loaded into them. So there's unique certificates involved as well as regular encryption. So it should be a pretty hard nut for somebody to crack as far as that goes. On the other side of things, the servers themselves are run by Amazon AWS. So Amazon has a number of tools that are in there that help protect AWS hosted platforms from being hacked. So we have those on the AWS side of things. And then as far as your accounts go, I mean, it's only as good as your username and password. So you want to have a strong password. And I do believe you can enable two-factor authentication as well using a Authy or something like that. So, if you're concerned about it, always when you can use two-factor authentication to make sure somebody can't get into your instance. I hope that answers the question there. But Zyxel's Nebula platform, it's available globally. So we comply with GDRP in Europe. We comply with PCI and HIPAA here. So it's been through all sorts of penetration testing, hacking testing, things like that we have to do and stay on top of to maintain compliance with those. Does Zyxel have access to a customer's cloud? Okay, that's a good question. And the answer to that is sort of, maybe, a little bit. So one of the things that happens here is, let's say you have a problem and you need us to help you with your problem. We need you to actually log into the Nebula interface and grant us access before we can see stuff. So in theory, everything is stored in our cloud, but everything is encrypted. And the way it's encrypted is tied to your username and stuff. So whoever is the owner or the admin on one of those instances, instance is the wrong word, but I'm just going to call them instance. In order for us to troubleshoot and see your logs and see what's going on your network, you have to grant us access. I'm not an expert in the back end. There may be some other certain logs that we have access to, that we don't need that for. I'm not really sure. I mean, obviously there's some sort of logging that's there for making sure the cloud is working and functioning properly and stuff. But for the most part, for like your local configuration, your local settings, your local that, you have to give us access. We cannot see it unless you give us access. I hope that answered the question as best I could. I am not an expert on that area, but I do know, we've had some very large customers call us up screaming at us because they're encountering some sort of issue, but they have not granted us access to their cloud. Some very large customers. And, we were like, we can't see it. We cannot physically get in there and see your settings. We cannot physically get in there and see your logs until you grant us access. We do not have the ability to force our way in and see what's going on. Again, we comply with HIPAA, GDRP, PCI, and lots of other rules around the world. So it's all been designed to comply with a lot of those. GDRP is really strict when it comes to privacy, and we comply with that. One more question here. So perhaps Papacian here is asking about the network topology view. So yes, there is plans for enhancement on the Nebula topology view. I forget which version coming up is going to have them, but I know I have seen mock-ups and it is on the roadmap at some point here in the future, I believe this year, to upgrade the network topology feature to add some more functionality to it. Anonymous attendee is asking about NIST 800-53. I think you asked me about this a couple of webinars ago. So I have looked into it. We do not comply with any of the NIST requirements. For the most part, most of our hardware cannot be sold to the US government because most of our stuff is made in China. We do have a few handful of pieces that are manufactured in Taiwan, but most of our manufacturing is coming from China. So we don't do a lot with the US government. We don't have enough business there to go through the testing and verify that we comply with NIST. So that's just not a market we're going after. For those of you asking, NIST 800-53 has to do with network equipment that's being used on non-classified government networks. So there's some rules and testing and certification. So we have not pursued that because that's not a market we're targeting our hardware to. And with that, guys, I'm going to go ahead and end today's webinar. My email is up there on the screen. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to email me directly, or alternately reach out to your salesperson. If you're here, you should be one of our partners. So you should be talking to either Andy, David, or Jacob as your salesperson. So you can always ask them questions. And if they don't know the answer, they can reach out to me or try, depending on the product, or Marcus, our sales engineer, and get you those answers if you have them. But thank you for turning out, guys. I hope to see you at one of our future webinars later this month. Thank you.